1 a.m. A horse, chained. No whinny. No struggle. Just standing there, like waiting for an execution. No owner. No campfire. No one coming back. Only a rusted blade, and a memory that had decayed for nearly 2 decades. When steel met chain, it didn't just sever a link. It ripped open the silence of a soul that once turned away. And when the horse stood between the bullet and the one who cut it free, it didn't do it out of instinct. Not because it was trained. It chose not to walk away. This is not a rescue story. This is a final confession from a world that once pretended to be blind. And the question for you is, if a soul once tied like trash still chooses to rise and forgive, would you dare? Dare to step forward. Not to save it, but to save the last human part still alive inside you? Gallop of Glory, this story will make it impossible to look away. Maine. 1 a.m. Snow sliced sideways like blades. The wind screamed through the cliffs like the mourning of creatures that never had names. Forrest Elon stood frozen among pine trees stripped bare by the frost. He wasn't searching. He wasn't shooting. He wasn't chasing inspiration. He was simply running from the city, from deadlines, from the looping dreams of a firelit afternoon when his father, a veterinarian, died among a herd of horses no one tried to save. Forrest Elon was never meant to be a hero. He grew up in a border town in Colorado, where his father, the last man who still listened to horses, used to call them by name, never with a whip. When Forrest was 17, he watched his father get beaten to the ground while trying to block a convoy smuggling Mustangs across the state line. Forrest stood less than 30 feet away. He didn't scream. He didn't move. From that day forward, Forrest left it all behind: the horses, the forest, his father, and himself. He became a photographer, but he never shot people. Never cities. Only creatures that couldn't speak, but always knew how to endure. Owls in a storm. Antlerless deer. An old wolf staring at the moon. He photographed souls flickering out, hoping that maybe he wasn't one of them. But tonight, he had no camera in hand. He wasn't looking for anything. And just when he thought he had nothing left to lose, he saw it. At first, Forrest thought it was a fallen log scorched by lightning. Then it moved. A creature stood motionless in the white woods, trembling from cold, not fear. A horse. Jet black. No saddle. No bridle. No footprints nearby. Just a chain, rusted iron biting into its neck, fastened tight to an old pine tree with bark stripped away. And at its hooves, dark, dried blood smeared the snow like someone had screamed, collapsed, and gone silent. No campfire. No med kit. No trace of a human. Only the horse. The wind. And a sentence being carried out in silence. Forrest stepped closer. The horse's eyes widened. But it didn't flinch. Didn't whinny. It just stared, as if saying, "I know you're not here to save me. I've seen too much to believe in that." A low growl echoed from deep within the forest. It wasn't wind. A bear. Forrest had no gun. Only his camera, and a blade, the same blade his father once used to cut bandages from a dying horse in the Nevada desert 30 years ago. He knew he should turn back. But instead, he stepped forward. With all the madness, or clarity, that only a man who had once lost his father could carry. and when the chain let out its first metallic cry beneath the old blade, the horse closed its eyes. Not out of fear, but because, for the first time, it wanted to believe. Forrest sank to the cold snow, the blade still warm with rust-stained blood. The chain had snapped, but the horse didn't move, as if freedom was too foreign a thing to believe in anymore. It panted, shoulders twitching, breath shallow and quick. Its hind legs trembled, barely holding its weight. Forrest could see the drag marks, the desperate scrapes on gray snow, where hooves once clawed at the earth, and then gave up. He glanced around. No more growling. The bear had retreated, or was simply waiting, until the bleeding stopped. And then he saw it. Something that made the air catch in his lungs. Human footprints. Not walking toward the woods, but away, back in the direction of the stream. Someone had stood here. Had seen the horse. Had known it was still alive. And had chosen to walk away. Forrest swallowed hard. One side, the Nikon camera still hanging from his shoulder. His only lifeline for over a decade. The other, a horse gasping, like every breath was a gamble with death. Camera or blade? Capture or save? He thought that question had died the day his father did. That the choice had been buried in fire and silence. But here, under moonlight slicing through the pines, beside a dying horse and abandoned tracks, he realized choices never die. Only the people who run from them do. Forrest dropped to his knees. Laid the camera gently in the snow. The horse collapsed. Its eyes were open, but they saw nothing. Thick, dark blood dripped from its mouth. He lunged forward, catching its head before it hit the ground. Its skin was ice. "Don't," he whispered, the words breaking apart in the wind. "Don't die. Not because of them. Not again." That last line wasn't for the horse. It was for the 17-year-old boy who had stood frozen inside him for nearly 20 years. Forrest raised the blade. Cut the rope strangling the horse's throat. The skin beneath oozed blood. Each slice didn't just free a knot. It peeled back the hatred he'd buried in himself since the day his father fell. The horse trembled, then leaned its head against Forrest's chest. Too weak to be afraid. Forrest held it. Not like a man saving a horse, but like a son who once needed saving, and no one ever came back. And in that moment, he heard it. Not a whinny. Not a growl. But a breath. A fragile breath. But still, the breath of something that hadn't given up yet. The air thickened. It wasn't just cold anymore, it was ice solidifying between the ribs. Forrest had no idea how long he'd been sitting there. He only remembered the horse's breath, now shallow, faltering, but still going. Still fighting. He quickly pulled off the scarf around his neck, slid it beneath the horse's head, wiped the blood crusting around its mouth. Then something shifted. Not wind. Not leaves. But silence snapping in half. A heavy sound. Dry. Cracking. Coming from the pines to the right. Forrest spun around. A shadow. Huge. Solid. Slow, but deliberate. A bear. Not a warning. Not imagination. Not a whisper of nature's threat. It was here. And it was watching. The horse shivered violently, neck twitching with each uneven breath. But still didn't move. Didn't flee. as if it had decided long ago that resistance was pointless. Forrest hadn't. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from calculation. What did he have left? The knife? Good for cutting rope. That's all. The Nikon camera? The only thing that could reflect light. The sun was hanging low now, skimming the edge of the ridge. In just minutes, it would vanish behind the trees. He had one shot. Not with bullets, but with light. The bear stepped forward. Its fur thick, glossy, streaked with dried blood from an old wound. Its eyes, black as cooled ash. Forrest crouched. Slowly unscrewed the lens cap. Slow. Painfully slow. A single click, the bear froze. Its nose twitched. One foreleg shifted, as if choosing which direction to charge. Forrest raised the camera. Not to shoot a photo. To bounce the light. The sun hit the lens, and a sharp beam of light pierced through, striking the bear in the eyes. It roared. Not in pain, but offended. The growl that followed wasn't a threat. It was a sentence. Forrest screamed, not to frighten the bear, but to keep himself from collapsing. He raised the camera again. This time the light struck a tree branch. A quick flash. A flicker of fire. The bear recoiled. Turned away. But didn't retreat. It veered left. Circling. Calculating. And then, a new shiver tore through Forrest's spine. There was another. Behind them. Heavy breathing. Twigs snapping. Not one. Two. No more time. Either lift the horse, or stay behind and watch death come again. Not from nature, but from hesitation. Forrest placed a hand on the horse's neck. Get up. Please. Please. Another roar, this one so close he could feel the heat of it blast across the back of his neck. The horse's eyes opened. 1 second. 2. Then it pushed. Legs shaking. Breathing labored. But it stood. Forrest gripped the rope. Not to pull. Just not to fall. They turned. And they ran. No looking back. No counting roars. No wondering if they had a chance. Just this. If they stayed, the ending wouldn't need writing. It would write itself, in silence and red. The wind sliced like a whip of frozen fire. Forrest dragged Branwyn through the brush, boots sinking deep into the snow. The horse trembled, blood streaking dark across the white. Just a few more steps, and then the ridge. And beyond that, the cliff. But Branwyn stopped. Collapsed. Crashing down. Legs convulsing. Mouth bubbling red. Eyes wide, no longer reacting, only surviving on instinct. And then, a roar. No longer echoing in the forest. It was right behind them. Forrest turned. The black bear, massive as a wall, charged straight at them. Eyes glowing like coals buried in mud. Claws pounding earth, cracking like breaking bones. No time to choose. Run? Too late. Fight? No chance. Only one option. Cut. He had to cut. Break the last chain. He dropped to his knees. The old knife, chipped, bent. His fingers blood-slicked. He didn't know if it was Branwyn's blood or his own. Then a memory struck. That field. That day. His father, A horse screaming, leg torn by chain. 17-year-old Forrest, just standing. Didn't run. Didn't scream. Just stood. And by the time he moved, his father was gone. I could have saved him. If I had just taken one step. This time, he stepped. Forrest gritted his teeth, snarled through clenched jaw. Don't die! Not here! Not because of them. Not like my father. He drove the blade into the chain. The bear roared. A second roar, closer. The ground trembled. Each cut shattered something inside him. He wasn't just cutting steel. He was cutting through every year he'd spent running. And then, clack! The chain snapped. Branwen didn't leap up. But it breathed. And that was enough. Forrest threw his arms around the horse, ready to pull it away. But a bear's claw smashed into the tree just inches away. Shards of bark sliced his face like knives. He staggered, fell, back slammed to the ground. Head spinning, blood in his mouth. The bear reared for the final blow. Then, hoofbeats. Not the predators. The horses. Branwen. It stood. Turned. Faced Forrest. No scream. No cry. Just a look. A look without instinct. Only resolve. And then, it stepped forward. Stood between Forrest and the bear. Like an answer. Like it was saying, you didn't turn your back on me. I won't turn mine on you. The bear raised its claw. Branwen didn't move. One strike. The ground gave. Snow crumbled, a cascade sweeping the bear sideways. It tumbled down, crashing against rock. The roar faded. Into silence. Only wind now. And breathing. Forrest crawled upright. Hands trembling. Lips split. He placed a hand on Branwen's neck. It was still breathing. Slow, but steady. And Forrest, whether from pain, relief, or simply the overwhelming truth, that he had just relived the past. He broke. No sound. Just shoulders heaving like a child. A child finally forgiven. Two beings. One man who had gone silent. One horse the world had abandoned. Stood up. Together. As if nothing in the world was terrifying anymore. Because the worst thing, being forgotten, they had just outrun it. They didn't know how long they had run. Only that the bear was no longer behind them. And when the only sound left was the quiet rhythm of their breath, Forrest collapsed beside a moss-covered stone. Before him stood a wall of rock, stained with green and age. Its weight swallowing the moonlight whole. Behind a tangle of vines. A gap. Small. Narrow. Just wide enough for a person to slip through. A cave. Dark. Cold. Not deep. But it was the first place without claws waiting inside it. Forrest stepped in first. Branwen stayed outside. Didn't move. Didn't whinny. Didn't turn away. Just stared. As if asking, if I go in there, will I be locked away again? Forrest didn't call. Didn't reach out. He simply stood in the shadows, hand on the stone wall. Back to the entrance. He didn't beg for trust. He gave it space to decide. For the first time, the choice was its own. A cold gust slipped into the cave. A soft shuffle, then the sound of hooves on stone. Branwen stepped in. Not because it was pulled. Not because it feared the dark. But because it wanted to. Forrest lit a fire with a handful of dry twigs from his gear. The flame was small. Fragile. But it beat the cold gnawing at their bones. Branwen lay 3 meters away. Didn't drink. Didn't eat. Just breathed. Softer now, steadier than before. But its eyes never left the man across the cave. Forrest shrugged off his coat. Laid it near the entrance on the stone floor. He didn't sit too close. Didn't want to break the distance Branwen was holding. Not out of fear of man, but from being too familiar with betrayal. He sat, back turned to the horse, staring into the night. Hours slipped by. Forrest didn't close his eyes. Not because he feared the bear might return, but because he feared the horse might leave. In the middle of the night. Without a sound. Without a trace. Just like his father once did. He turned his head slightly. Branwen was still there. Still breathing. Still watching. Eyes wide open. Just like his had been. After his father died. Too scared to sleep. Because if he closed his eyes, what little faith he had left might vanish too. Outside, the wind rustled the moss like whispers from another world. The fire flickered, throwing jagged shadows on the cave wall. Like the spine of a horse carved in flame. After hours of silence, Forrest reached into his pack. Pulled something out. The camera. He didn't power it on. Didn't raise it to shoot. He placed it on the ground and pushed it gently toward Branwen. A gesture. A surrender of memory. Not to capture the moment, but to say, I choose to see with real eyes. And with my heart. Branwen tilted its head. Stepped closer. Touched the camera lightly with its muzzle. No fear. No flinch. Just one gentle touch. As if brushing against a forgiven past. They lay a few steps apart. No words. No commands. No gestures. But in that silence, a language was formed. A pact, unwritten. I won't force you to trust. But if you stay, I won't leave again. The wind stopped. The fire died. There was nothing but breath. But this time, it wasn't cold. It was warm. Dawn hadn't broken yet. Inside the cave, the fire had long since died, leaving behind only faint trails of smoke on the cold stone floor. Forrest still hadn't slept. Branwen lay still, but its chest rose and fell, rhythmically. For the first time, it looked alive. Not like a fragment of something forgotten, but a being that chose to stay breathing. Forrest sat up. Ran his fingers gently along the horse's spine, as if checking the wounds. Branwen didn't flinch. He slowly pulled the coat away from its back. And that's when he saw it. Just above the shoulder blade, near the spine. A warped shape burned into the skin. At first, it looked like an old injury. But when Forrest wiped away the dirt, the crusted blood, the dead skin, it appeared. Clear. Frozen. Real. 3 diagonal slashes, carved over a broken horseshoe. He stepped back. Gripping the edge of his coat, knuckles white. He knew that mark. The insignia of Sable Pine's livestock. A name that once masked the illegal slaughter of wild Mustangs under the guise of rescue. A place never printed on any map. But his father had investigated it. And not long after, he died. Forrest braced both hands against the cave floor. Breath ragged. Eyes burning. Not from cold, but from memory. He saw every horse he'd ever captured through a lens. Eyes hollow. Bodies curled up before being loaded into trucks. The moments he'd turned away. Because he thought, I can't stop this. But now, right in front of him, was a living witness. Branded like defective cargo. Still breathing. Not to be pitied, but to call him to his feet. You're a witness. You're evidence. And if I let you die, this time it's not because I couldn't do anything. It's because I chose not to. Forrest stood. Didn't look at Branwen. Walked to his backpack. Unzipped it. Inside, an old terrain map of Maine. Once used to find shelter in storms. But in the lower left corner, red markings. Drop points. Where animals were moved from deep woods to highway trucks. He pulled out a pen. Circled every red dot. And drew one big ring around a specific location. Where he believed Branwen had been left. Not to flee. To return. But not alone. Behind him, hoofbeats. Soft on stone. Branwen stood. Forrest stopped writing. Turned around. Their eyes met. No words. No gestures. No commands. Just one truth. Crystal clear between them. This journey wasn't about going with a horse. It was about walking for one. One who carried the mark of betrayal. The morning wind carried a wet, cutting chill. Forrest sat by the cave's entrance, eyes staring out into the old forest. But his gaze had sunk deep into the years that had died inside him. This place, 17 years ago. An official wildlife seizure, they called it. Under the law. But in truth, it was a clearing. A path carved open for commercial breeding camps. His father, an old veterinarian named Caleb Elon, was the only one who opposed it. Not with guns. Not with slogans. Just a frail body. And hands that knew how to comfort animals no one wanted anymore. 17-year-old Forrest had followed him that day. He stood on the hillside and watched his father step out in front of a truck. A truck herding screaming wild Mustangs, the last of them thrashing like they knew they would never return. His father raised a hand. Didn't shout. Only said, "If you want to take them, you'll have to go through me." And they did. No guns. Just a shove. His head struck rock. Blood spread. No one stopped. No one turned around. Forrest stood there. Close enough to run. Sane enough to scream. But he didn't. He just stood. Like a ghost. A boy too afraid to pick a side. And too empty to be brave enough to be wrong. Candle tying past to present. Forrest shivered. The heat from the fire beside him couldn't chase off the cold crawling up from his chest. He looked back at Branwen. The horse still slept. But its scars, like the ghosts in Forrest's own chest, were still there. Not this time. This time, I won't just watch. Rain began to fall. The forest glistened. The scent of wet earth and rotting leaves rose. Like a symphony from the belly of the land. Branwen stood near the cave's mouth. Head lowered. Lips cracked and dry. Eyes open, but not wild. Only weary. Forrest stepped forward. No rush. No force. He sat. Opened his hand. Let raindrops gather in his palm. The same palm where his father's blood once ran. A small pool. He didn't offer it. Just held it out. Branwen turned. Hesitant. One step. Two. Slow. As if afraid everything was a trap. Then, it lowered its head. Touched its muzzle to his hand. Licked. Once. Twice. Then, drank. Not much. Not fast. But it wasn't water. It was life. For the first time since being chained, it chose to reclaim the part of its soul that had been taken. Forrest didn't cry, but his hands trembled, as if he, too, had just been saved by the lightest touch of a tongue. That night, inside the cave, the fire was small. No bears. No storms. Only breathing. Forrest hadn't planned to speak, but something inside told him, if you don't name it, a part of you will remain nameless forever. He sat a few steps away, looked into its eyes that no longer avoided his, only waited. Quietly. Branwen, he whispered. One word. Not a command. Not a microchip. Just a sound born from memory. Wrapped in trust. The horse didn't reply, but it turned its head. Slowly. Millimeter by millimeter. And when their eyes met, Forrest knew. It heard. And it chose not to turn away. Branwen. The name of a horse. But also, the first time Forrest called the part of himself back that had been lost for years. A pair of steel-toed boots crushed the rotting grass. A blade snapped open. The scent of old smoke lingered. And there it was, the severed chain. Right in front of two men whose eyes were emptier than any animal they'd ever hunted. Clayton, a former butcher at an illegal slaughterhouse, knelt. Ran his fingers along the broken link. Rust. Still warm. Someone had interfered. And to him, it wasn't just a chain that had been cut. It was an execution order. We don't leave anything alive. No horse. No human. Forrest collapsed on a slippery mountain pass. His head struck stone. Blood spread across his shirt. His eyelids sank. And then, black. Branwen stopped. It could have left. The forest ahead was wide open. Freedom almost within reach. But it turned back. Not for the rope. Not for command. But for the one who had once spoken its name. It lowered its head. Pressed its forehead to Forrest's shoulder. Then tugged at his shirt. Pulled. Held on. Until Forrest opened his eyes. No one had taught it that. Only a life once betrayed. Now choosing to protect another from being lost again. Bang! A shot cracked the air. The bullet grazed Forrest's shoulder, slicing a thin red line. He and Branwen dove into a rock crevice. No roar. No warning. Only the footsteps of someone who knew exactly who they were hunting. Inside the narrow gap, Forrest clutched his wound. Blood trickled. Sweat poured. Branwen stood at the mouth, ears pinned, unmoving. Not a sound. Not a step. Just there. Like a living wall. A wild horse had learned to shield. A man had stopped choosing to hide. The mountaintop blazed in pale light. Forrest placed the coiled rope on the ground. Didn't speak. Just looked at Branwen, then turned away. No call. No plea. No command. If you trust me, walk with me. If not, I won't force you. Not like the ones before. He walked. One step. Then another. Each one tighter in the chest than the last. Behind him, no hoofbeats. No motion. Only a silence so thick it held time still. And then... crack. A twig broke. A hoof touched earth. Branwen stepped forward. No words were spoken, because the answer was already known. The forest didn't stir. The wind didn't howl. Only one thing echoed. The cold click of a rusted shotgun. Clayton stood no more than 30 feet from Forrest. Eyes red. Hands steady. The look of a man who no longer believed life deserved respect. You think cutting a chain changes anything? This thing, it was born to be taken. He aimed. He had no gun. No knife. Only a body that once wanted to die. Now choosing to stand. He spread his arms. Shielded Branwen. Not to say I'm a hero, but to say, if you shoot, you're going to kill the first man. Whoever feared not saving a horse. It stood behind Forrest. Unbound. Unchained. Just stood. And watched. Its eyes, no panic. Only stillness. Like a frozen lake holding the weight of 1,000 winters. Then, a gasp. Not from the man. From the horse. Branwen screamed. Not a whinny. A tear through silence. No one called it. No one ordered. Branwen launched forward. Not off course. Not in fear. Not needing a reason. Only one truth screamed in its blood. This time, you don't get to end US. Clayton flinched. Pulled the trigger. Missed. The bullet vanished into open air. Because Branwen had already taken flight. Its hooves didn't aim for the man, but the cliff wall behind him. Boom. The ground cracked. Rocks fell. The ridge gave way. Clayton dropped. Eyes wide. Mouth open. But no voice came out. Only the sound of stone crushing bone. When the dust settled, Forrest was on his knees. Clutching his chest. Too breathless to speak. Branwen stood. One front leg bleeding. Shoulders swollen. But its eyes, fixed on Forrest. Not asking, did I do the right thing? But, do you believe me now? No cheering. No rescue. Just a man collapsed on the ground. A bleeding horse keeping watch. And a soul once silenced. Now protected by something wild. Forrest whispered. Not to Branwen, but to the part of himself long buried. You're not a product anymore. You're the final warning. Thunder cracked. Rain fell like lashes across the spine of the forest. Branwen bolted. Forrest ran after, not because he had to, but because, for the first time in his life, he didn't want to die. Behind them, shouting. Footsteps pounding through underbrush. One man was still standing. The sound of metal, a gun being cocked. The wind screamed like a voice from hell. Run faster, or this ends here. Branwen soared across a stream. Water exploded in white arcs, slicing across Forrest's back like needles. Ahead, lightning struck a tree. It crashed down, thunderous. Branwen didn't hesitate. It twisted, turned, a black arrow through the forest. Forrest didn't stop to think. He leapt. His feet didn't touch the ground. But his heart, for the first time, touched the pulse of being alive. This wasn't escape. It was liberation. From the ghost that had haunted him for 17 years. The sky hung heavy and gray. A dirt road opened through shredded leaves. And then, a sound that didn't belong to the wild. An engine. A battered pickup skidded to a stop. The driver stepped out. Ball cap. Silver beard. His eyes widened at the sight. Forrest and a mud-slicked, blood-splattered horse. Standing there like survivors from a war no one had declared. Forrest Elon. You're Caleb's boy? Forrest nodded. No smile. No tears. He walked to the truck bed. Opened the gate. Branwen leapt in. Not dragged. Not locked. It climbed in, because this time it knew. The truck wasn't taking it to the end. The driver stared. What? What did you just save? Forrest looked at Branwen. Whispered. I didn't save it. It saved me. The old wooden chair creaked. Forrest sat inside a small legal office in the heart of the city. Wind slipped through a cracked window, carrying the scent of gasoline and smoke. The scent of a world that never believed in souls. On the desk, a 7-page affidavit. Each line sharp enough to shake North America's animal transport industry. Every word, Forrest's. But he wasn't looking at the file. He looked at the letter attached. Only 6 lines. But it felt heavier than all the rest. Its name is Branwen. It was branded by fire. Tied to a tree like a defective product. I once stood still while my father fell, for refusing to look away from a truckload of horses. This time, I didn't stand still. And if souls are real, that horse saved mine. Kendall Forrest looked up, and for the first time, didn't see his father in the mirror anymore. His eyes were red. But dry. He placed the pen beside the final line. Not to end it, but to offer what remained of his humanity. Back to the conscience of the world. But its eyes, the way it had looked at him when he nearly collapsed, were reflected in the ink that now marked the page. Steady. Unshaken. Unforgettable. You were once a wild horse. Then burned. Then labeled worthless. But now, you don't need a label. Your name alone is enough to make those who kill souls bow their heads. Forrest stood. The papers stayed. The lawyer would send them. The courts would see them. But that wasn't the point. The point was this. For the first time, a man who once gave up, gave a name to a horse. And for the first time, a horse once sold by weight, became the weight of the truth itself. Night fell. No more chases. No more pursuit. Just an open field of tender grass, silver under a moon thin as paper. Branwen stood atop the hill. The wind slipped through its mane, like it was whispering the name of something lost long ago. At its feet, the forest. Once a prison. Ahead, nothing. But also, everything. Behind it, Forrest leaned against a pine. No camera. No notebook. No shutter clicks. He just watched. As if he finally understood. Some things don't need to be captured. Their existence is enough. Branwen didn't whinny. Didn't turn around. Just stood still. And let the wind move through its body. As if asking, does freedom have a shape? Morning. A small boy from the village pointed up the hill, where Branwen still stood, like an unfinished story carved into the land. Is that your horse? The boy asked. Forrest smiled, looked at the child, then looked at Branwen. He shook his head. No, it was never mine. Branwen turned its head. Slow. Not rushed. Not afraid. Not in pain. Just a farewell. That didn't need words. Then it vanished into the mist. As if it had never been there. As if it had come for one purpose. To lead a man back to himself. The boy kept watching. Then asked again, where is it going? Forrest didn't answer. That afternoon, no one heard a sound. No wind. No hoofbeats. Only the scratch of pen on paper. And the weight of a heartbeat heavy as stone. Forrest wrote. Not with his hand, but with the remains of 17 years of silence and running. I once believed that silence meant I wasn't to blame. But the moment I watched my father fall among the horses and said nothing, that silence became my crime. That horse, Branwen, was no miracle. It didn't speak, wore no crown, created no legend. But when it stood in front of a bullet for me, I knew some souls don't need words to teach us how to live again. Candle, he folded the letter. And beneath it, wrote one final line. If a soul once burned alive, once tied up like trash, chooses to rise, chooses to forgive, chooses not to turn away, then do you dare? Dare to walk with it, not to save it, but to find out how much of your own humanity remains. Forrest stepped out of the wooden office. The forest stretched before him. Tall pines. Cold mist. A silence so thick that even a tap would echo like thunder. And he rang the bell. An old one. Wooden. Hung at the entrance of his father's abandoned rescue camp. No one had touched it in decades. Come. The bell rang through the pines. Down the valley. Into the hearts of those who'd never been named, and all the creatures never once called someone. Forrest said nothing more. He turned and walked down the hill. Behind him, the forest gave no answer. Only the soft echo of hoofbeats. Or maybe the wind. Or maybe a soul knocking on the door of your memory. Not every soul that falls needs someone to lift it. Some only need a single look to rise one last time. Branwen didn't whinny, didn't resist, didn't demand a right to live. It just stood there, between the bullet and the one who once represented an entire world that turned away. It chose not to leave, not because it believed in humanity, but because someone had chosen not to look away like the rest. And if your heart just skipped a beat, it's possible. You just brushed against the part of yourself the world told you to forget. The lesson of this story doesn't lie in the chain that broke. It lies in the moment after. when nothing held it back. Yet that soul still turned around to wait for you to walk beside it. If Bramlin's eyes made it hard for you to look away, if just once you saw yourself in that panicked step, or that silent, enduring gaze, leave us a comment. Share this story with someone who once believed they were forgotten. And don't forget to subscribe to Gallop of Glory, because the next story might be the only thing that reminds you. Trust, even when burned to ash, can still reignite if someone dares to speak its name.